my name is Taylor White, and for my AP Poetry project, I decided to do John Milton. Now, who is John Milton? What is he? How did he come to be here? Well, John Milton is a person, so he was born. But moving on from that, into his early days, John Milton grew up with his father, who was a kind of not overly famous, but kind of famous composer. And his father being a composer of music, it actually gave him a later appreciation for music and musicians themselves. And because of this, they actually were very wealthy, and John himself was a very clever lad, and he was very smart. And so at the age of 13, he went to what we would consider a high school. And he later went to college. While he was in college, he was studying abroad, and he learned several languages like Latin, Hebrew, and Greek. He actually wrote most of his works in Latin rather than his native language of English. He learned while he was on his study abroad that the monarchy in England had been overthrown. And he was overjoyed and just absolutely ecstatic. He was so happy about it that he actually rushed home from his studies and got to sit in England and revel in the beauty of the fact that the monarchy was gone. He had 3 wives over the course of his life. His first wife died actually after their 4th child. She died during childbirth. The child, Deborah, she made it through okay. And he never had, or he eventually did, but during the first years of their lives, he had very strained relationships with his children because he just wasn't a very connected person. His second wife actually died during childbirth as well. It would have been his second wife's first daughter. Her name would have been Catherine, but she also died. And later, John Milton married his 3rd and final wife, who was named Mary Powell. And their age difference was 31 years. And even though their age difference was so far apart, they clicked very well. And he actually was married to her for 11 years until he died. And moving back a little, after the fall of the monarchy, John Milton came back and he wrote a couple of pieces on how he was so happy that Charles I was killed in the name of the downfall of the monarchy, and he was glad that it was over because he hated it so much. He felt that the monarchy abused their power and the Church of England wasn't doing much better. Oliver Cromwell saw these, and he was like, hey, this John Milton guy, kind of cool, gonna have to buddy up with him. So he did, and John Milton ended up translating texts from Latin to English so that the army could read them, and it was several different uses for all kinds of different texts. And during this time, John Milton spent so many hours in the dim light of trying to decipher all of these scrolls from Latin to English that he ended up losing his eyesight. And by that time, he had only written 3 very popular, or 3 of his own poems that became popular later. And they were called Lycidas, Allegro, and Il Penseroso. I probably butchered those names, I'm sorry. But he wrote those 3. And also, after he lost his eyesight, the monarchy came back into power, much to his horror. And because of all of his horrible political stuff he had put out about the monarchy, they were kind of angry at that, so they put him in jail. Poor blind man, just fiddling around in jail for a while. They actually let him out later. And after he became a hardened criminal, he sat down with his daughters and he told the story of Paradise Lost to them, and he made them write down everything he said, and it became one of the greatest epic poems of all time. He did the same thing with Paradise Regained later. But before these two, or yes, before he wrote these two, he wrote a couple of sonnets, which I will now read to the class. Now, sonnet number 7 is called How Soon Hath Time, and this basically is when he's 23 years old. He's 24 years old. He is reflecting on the past 24 years of his life, and he doesn't see how much has changed, and he doesn't believe that his poetry is really getting as far as he'd like it to, and he's really worried about it. And before I read this, though, if you think back to the word sonnet, you usually think maybe Elizabeth Browning, or I think that was her name, or Shakespeare, and their sonnets were about love and passion and beauty and the greatness and wonderful joys of life. Milton is a depressing person and took that belief and just stomped it into the ground, and he said, I don't care what past poets said in their sonnets, I can do whatever I want because I'm John Milton. Anyway, How Soon Hath Time? Reading it. How soon hath time, the subtle thief of youth, stolen on his wing my 23 year. My hasting days fly on with full career, but my late spring no bud or blossom showeth. Perhaps my semblance might deceive the truth, that I to manhood am arrived so near, and inward ripeness doth much less appear. That some more timely happy spirits indueth, yet be it less or more, or soon or slow. It shall be in strictest measure that to the same lot, however mean or high, toward which time leads me, and the will of heaven. All is, if I have grace to use it so, as ever in my great taskmaster's eye. It's not as depressing out loud as it is when you read it, but it is depressing. Sad stuff. Another sonnet he wrote followed the same path of, why should I write happy stuff? I'm John Milton. My wife's died. Anyway, this sonnet is called When I Consider How My Light Is Spent, and it's basically, I can't really find if this was if he wrote this after he'd gone blind or not, but I believe it has, because he's looking back on his life and seeing what exactly it shows for all of his hard work and what he believes in, and he doesn't know if it's all been exactly what he wanted out of it. So, when I consider how my light is spent. When I consider how my light is spent, ere half my days in this dark world and wide, and that one talent, which is death to hide, lodged with me useless, though my soul more bent to serve therewith my Maker and present my true account, lest he returning chide, doth God exact day labor, light denied. I fondly ask, but patience to prevent. The murmur soon replies, God doth not need either man's work or his own gifts. Who best bear his mild yoke, they serve with him best. His state is kingly, thousands at his bidding speed, and post o'er the land and ocean without rest. They also serve who only stand and wait. Not lovey, not happy. Depressing stuff, Milton. Depressing stuff. Following a depressing line of works, Paradise Lost. We read this in class, so most of us already know what it's about, those of us who read it. And basically, Paradise Lost is a fictional look on Lucifer's fall from heaven and the loss of his grace. So, briefly, basically, Lucifer believes that he is abandoning and rebelling against God because, in his eyes, God is a tyrant, and he's given them free will but expects them not to use it. And that doesn't fly with Lucifer. He thinks that's dumb, and why would he be given free will if he can't use it? So he takes him and an army of angels, and they leave. And this correlates directly with the political times rather than the religious. This story is more for the fact of God represents the monarchy in England at the time, and Lucifer is what Milton... not per se himself, but more the people of England, and how they have free will and that they should use it, and there's no reason they shouldn't. And Paradise Lost also, John Milton wrote Paradise Lost the way he did, with the symbols of Satan and God and the angels, because that was his hook for people to read it. Because if it was just random names, you would have gone with Lucifer, because it would have had no ties to the Bible, and the connotation of Lucifer and Satan's, or the same person's name, wouldn't have been evil, and you would have sided with Lucifer. He would have been the hero. But Milton wanted people to think, and he wanted to revolutionize the way people were looking at this whole Civil War and everything. And so he did the exact same thing with Paradise Regained, but instead of Lucifer's downfall, it was hundreds of years afterwards, and it was basically Lucifer is tempting Jesus, trying to get him to think for himself. So what he does is he sees that Jesus is out by himself for about 40 days, and so at first he tries to tempt him with food, because, you know, after 40 days, a normal person would be parched and hungry and, dead. So he tried with food, and Jesus denied it. And so he continued with his temptations of power and kingdoms and all kinds of different crazy stuff, like music. Kind of reminds me of Devil Went Down to Georgia, Living for Souls Deal, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, not important. John Milton stuff, awesome. Okay, so, John Milton, Paradise Regained. Basically, this poem, or epic, or whatever, again, followed the political times, and how, again, the monarchy was not doing its job, and the church wasn't helping much either. This all was Milton's way of not getting put back in jail, because he learned his lesson the first time. So he used the symbols instead of the Bible. They were all works of fiction, obviously. Can't exactly rewrite the Bible, because that's just crazy. So, after Paradise Regained, they became enormously popular because it was a very Christian time period. And people ate it up, and they couldn't believe what they were reading, because it was Lucifer was the hero, and they didn't understand why. And then people slowly caught on. So, what all of his poems and everything conveyed about Milton was that Milton was very anti-authority. He hated how the monarchy was behaving, and he knew it was wrong. So he thought, you know what, England has free will, everyone has free will, why aren't we using it? YOLO, live your life, carpe diem, stuff, heartbeats and such. Yeah, that's awesome. But, basically, he was very, down with the man, Charles I, glad he's dead. Woo! So, he portrayed this in his epics. Ironically, Homer, when he wrote the Iliad and the Odyssey, was also blind. So, they were blind buddies with epics. And it was kind of awesome, because they were blind. But anyway, so Milton, all of his poetry, back to the statement I just made, Milton just wanted England to think for themselves, and not just England. He wanted the world to see that each person has a life, and they only have one. So, no matter how powerful you think that the one ruling is, blindly following them with faith may not always be the right answer. And free will gives you the chance to decide on your own whether it's a good idea or not. So, Milton was actually even more philosophical than the original people had thought he was with Paradise Lost and Paradise Regained. So, John Milton, the revolutionizer, very, the original hippie, down with the man and such. There's less drugs use, less banjos. They used banjos in the 60s? I don't know. I wasn't from the 60s. nor was I from John Milton's side. But that is my video on John Milton, and I hope it was less awkward than it felt to film this.